Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates painted their nails and talked about boys, she spent her weekends climbing trees and racing her older brothers through muddy creek beds. Her father, a retired Army sergeant, watched with quiet pride as his daughter outran, outclimbed, and outstubborned most kids twice her size. The dream began when Sarah was 12 years old. She was watching a documentary about elite military units with her father when footage of Army Rangers appeared on screen. These soldiers moved through impossible terrain, carried enormous loads, and never gave up no matter how hard things got. Her father noticed her eyes light up. "Dad, can girls do that?" she asked, pointing at the screen. Her father paused for a moment. "Not yet, sweetheart, but maybe someday." That someday became Sarah's North Star. She spent her teenage years preparing without even knowing it. She joined the cross-country team and never missed a practice, even when her knees ached and her lungs burned. She learned to fix cars with her brothers, developing the mechanical skills that would later prove invaluable. Most importantly, she learned to push through when everything in her body screamed to quit. After high school, Sarah enlisted in the Army immediately. She knew she had to prove herself worthy of even attempting Ranger School. She volunteered for every difficult assignment, completed airborne training with flying colors, and earned her place in the 82nd Airborne Division. Her soldiers respected her because she never asked them to do anything she wouldn't do herself. When the Army finally opened Ranger School to women in 2015, Sarah was ready. She had been preparing for this moment for over a decade. Her superiors recommended her without hesitation. She was 26 years old, physically stronger than she had ever been, and mentally prepared for the challenge of her lifetime. Ranger School was designed to break people. The course lasted 61 days and was divided into 3 phases. Benning Phase at Fort Benning, Georgia, Mountain Phase at Dahlonega, Georgia, and Swamp Phase in Florida. Only 60% of candidates typically graduated. The training was so intense that students lost an average of 20 pounds during the course. Sarah arrived at Fort Benning on a scorching July morning. She looked around at her fellow candidates, all men except for 2 other women. The instructors, called Ranger Instructors or RIs, made it clear from day one that they didn't care about anyone's gender, background, or feelings. They cared about one thing: whether you could meet the Ranger standard. The first week was a nightmare. Sarah had thought she was in excellent shape, but Ranger School redefined what physical fitness meant. 5-mile runs in full combat gear, rope climbing until her hands bled, and obstacle courses that seemed designed by someone who hated the human body. She watched strong men break down and quit within the first few days, but Sarah held on. She gritted her teeth through every painful exercise, forced down the terrible military meals, and tried to catch a few hours of sleep whenever possible. The sleep deprivation was almost worse than the physical challenges. Students were lucky to get 3 or 4 hours of sleep per night and often got much less. The academic portion was equally demanding. Sarah had to learn battle drills, tactical procedures, and leadership principles while her brain felt like mush from exhaustion. She studied by flashlight in her sleeping bag, reading the same pages over and over until they finally made sense. During the mountain phase, everything got worse. The Georgia mountains were unforgiving, especially with a 60-pound rucksack and minimal food. Sarah's boots gave her blisters that became infected. Her body weight dropped dangerously low. But she kept going, one step at a time, one day at a time. The leadership evaluations were the most stressful part. Students had to lead their peers through complex missions, while instructors watched their every move. One major mistake meant automatic failure. Sarah led her first patrol perfectly, navigating through dense forest and coordinating her team like a seasoned professional. But during her second leadership position, disaster struck. Sarah was leading a night reconnaissance mission when she misread her map in the darkness. Instead of reaching the objective, she led her exhausted squad in a complete circle for 6 hours. When the sun came up and she realized her mistake, her heart sank. The ranger instructor was waiting for her with a grim expression. "You're done, Martinez," he said simply. "Report to the TAC, Training, Advising, and Counseling Office." Sarah felt like the world was ending. All those years of preparation, all those dreams, and she had failed because of one navigation error. She packed her gear in silence while her fellow students offered quiet words of encouragement. Most of them respected her for making it as far as she had. The bus ride back to Fort Benning was the longest 2 hours of Sarah's life. She stared out the window at the mountains she had fought so hard to conquer, and felt completely empty inside. When she called her father to tell him the news, he could hear the devastation in her voice. "I'm proud of you for trying," he said. That took more courage than most people will ever have. But Sarah wasn't ready to give up. Even as she sat on that bus watching her dreams disappear behind her, a small voice in her head was already planning the next attempt. Ranger School allowed students to recycle, to try again under certain circumstances. Sarah began researching the requirements before she even returned to her regular unit. The failure hurt more than any physical pain she had experienced during the course. It followed her home, invaded her sleep, and made her question everything she thought she knew about herself. But it also taught her something valuable. She could survive disappointment and keep moving forward. This failure wouldn't define her unless she let it. 6 months later, Sarah stood at the gates of Fort Benning again. This time felt different. The sting of her first failure had transformed into something harder and more determined. She had spent every day since her first attempt analyzing what went wrong and fixing her weaknesses. She practiced land navigation until she could read maps in complete darkness. She ran longer distances and carried heavier weights. Most importantly, she had developed a mental toughness that her first attempt had lacked. The Army had approved her request to recycle through Ranger School. Her company commander, Captain Williams, had fought hard to get her a second chance. He believed Sarah had what it took to become a ranger, and her first attempt had only proven her dedication. Not many soldiers were willing to put themselves through that hell twice. Sarah's second class was smaller than her first. Word had spread about how brutal the course was, and fewer women were volunteering. Sarah found herself as one of only 2 female candidates this time. The other woman, Jessica Chen, was a military police officer from California who had also failed her first attempt. They formed an unspoken bond, 2 women who refused to give up on their dreams. The physical challenges felt more manageable this time. Sarah's body remembered the pain and had adapted. She knew how to pace herself during the long runs and how to distribute weight in her rucksack to avoid injury. Her infected blisters from the first attempt had taught her better foot care techniques. She arrived at each training event better prepared and more confident. But Ranger School had a way of humbling even the most prepared students. During the Benning phase, Sarah excelled in all her leadership positions. She navigated perfectly, communicated clearly with her team, and completed every mission successfully. The instructors began to notice her improvement, and she could see approval in their eyes when they thought she wasn't looking. The mountain phase began in October, and the Georgia weather was perfect for training. Cool temperatures made the heavy rucksack marches more bearable, and the beautiful fall colors provided a stunning backdrop for their suffering. Sarah felt strong and confident as she led her squad through the challenging terrain. Her first mountain leadership position went flawlessly. She successfully planned and executed a reconnaissance mission, gathering intelligence while keeping her team hidden from enemy forces. The ranger instructor gave her a rare nod of approval. Sarah allowed herself to feel cautiously optimistic. But during her second mountain leadership evaluation, the weather turned brutal. A surprise ice storm hit the mountains, coating everything with a treacherous layer of ice. What should have been a routine patrol became a dangerous navigation nightmare. Visibility dropped to almost 0, and the temperature plummeted below freezing. Sarah was leading her squad to an ambush position when one of her soldiers slipped on the ice and tumbled down a steep embankment. The fall was bad, really bad. The soldier, Private Johnson, landed hard on his shoulder and couldn't move his arm. In the growing darkness and freezing rain, Sarah had to make a critical decision. The mission required her squad to reach their position by midnight to intercept enemy forces. But Johnson was seriously injured and needed medical attention. Sarah called for a medical evacuation, knowing it would compromise her mission but unwilling to leave an injured soldier behind. She organized her remaining team members to secure Johnson and mark a landing zone for the helicopter. The medical helicopter couldn't land safely in the icy conditions. Sarah had to coordinate with her squad to carry Johnson to a better location while maintaining radio communication with the aircraft. It took 3 hours of dangerous movement through the dark, icy forest. By the time they evacuated Johnson, Sarah's mission was completely blown. The ranger instructor was waiting when she finally reached the rally point. His expression told her everything she needed to know before he spoke. "Martinez, you made the right choice for the soldier, but you failed the mission. In combat, These kinds of decisions get people killed. You're recycled. Sarah felt the familiar crushing weight of disappointment, but this time it was mixed with anger. She had made the morally correct choice. No ranger would ever leave an injured soldier behind. But the training scenario was designed to test whether she would prioritize the mission over individual welfare. In the artificial world of ranger school, she had failed again. Jessica Chen tried to comfort her as Sarah packed her gear for the second time. "You did the right thing," she whispered. "Any decent human being would have done the same." But that didn't make the failure hurt any less. Sarah had been so close to completing the mountain phase. She could see the finish line, and it had been ripped away from her again. This time the emotional pain was worse because she truly believed she had learned from her first mistake. The bus ride back to Fort Benning was even more devastating than the first time. Sarah questioned whether she was cut out for this level of training. Maybe she wasn't mentally tough enough. Maybe she cared too much about individual soldiers to make the hard command decisions that rangers needed to make. Her father met her at the airport when she flew home to Texas for a few days of leave. He could see the defeat in her eyes and knew better than to offer empty encouragement. Instead, he took her to their favorite fishing spot and let her sit in silence for most of the day. "You know what I think?" he finally said as the sun was setting. "I think you're exactly the kind of person the Army needs as a ranger. Someone who won't abandon their people." Sarah appreciated his words, but she wasn't sure she had the strength for a third attempt. 2 failures felt like enough punishment for 1 lifetime. Her career was already suffering from the extended time away from her regular duties. Other officers were getting promoted while she chased an impossible dream. But as the days passed, Sarah found herself unable to let go. She researched how many students failed Ranger School multiple times before succeeding. The numbers were encouraging. Many successful Rangers had failed at least once before graduating. Some had failed twice or even 3 times. More importantly, Sarah realized that her second failure had taught her something valuable about leadership. Sometimes there are no perfect choices, only hard ones. She had chosen to prioritize her soldiers' welfare over mission success. And while it cost her in the training environment, it was the kind of decision that would make her a better leader in real combat situations. 3 weeks after her second failure, Sarah submitted paperwork for her third attempt at Ranger School. This time she wasn't driven just by personal ambition. She wanted to prove that caring about your soldiers didn't make you weak. It made you stronger. She wanted to show that a leader could be both mission-focused and soldier-focused. The approval process took longer this time. 3 attempts at Ranger School were unusual, and some officials questioned whether Sarah was simply wasting resources. But Captain Williams fought for her again, and this time he brought testimonials from soldiers who had served under Sarah's command. They all said the same thing. She was the kind of leader they would follow anywhere. When the approval finally came through, Sarah felt different than she had before her previous attempts. She wasn't nervous or excited. She was determined with a calm certainty that surprised her. She had failed twice, learned from both failures, and was ready to prove that her third try would be her last. Sarah's third arrival at Fort Benning felt like coming home to a place she never wanted to see again. The familiar smell of pine trees and red Georgia clay triggered memories of her previous failures. But this time, she used those memories as fuel instead of fear. She had studied every detail of her past mistakes and had developed strategies to avoid repeating them. The months between her second failure and third attempt had been transformative. Sarah had worked with a sports psychologist to develop mental resilience techniques. She learned to compartmentalize stress and make clear decisions under pressure. She practiced visualization exercises, imagining herself successfully completing each phase of Ranger School until the scenarios felt as real as memories. Physically, Sarah had never been stronger. She had adjusted her training routine based on lessons learned from her previous attempts. Instead of just building raw strength and endurance, she focused on functional fitness that would directly apply to Ranger School challenges. She practiced carrying heavy loads over long distances, climbing ropes until her hands developed permanent calluses, and navigating in all weather conditions. Most importantly, Sarah had developed a new mental framework for leadership decisions. She studied military history and read case studies of successful combat leaders. She learned that the best commanders found ways to accomplish their missions while taking care of their soldiers. It wasn't an either-or choice. It was a both-and challenge that required creativity and determination. This third class was different from her previous 2 attempts. The Army had refined the Ranger School program based on lessons learned from integrating women into the course. The standards remained exactly the same, but the instructors had gotten better at evaluating leadership potential rather than just looking for traditional masculine aggression. Sarah's squad included some of the most motivated soldiers she had ever met. These men had specifically requested to train alongside the female candidates because they wanted to be part of history. They formed a tight unit that supported each other through the early challenges of the benning phase. The physical training felt almost routine to Sarah now. Her body knew what to expect and had adapted accordingly. She paced herself during the runs, ate strategically to maintain energy, and slept whenever possible. More importantly, she helped her fellow students who were struggling with their first exposure to Ranger School's intensity. During the academic portion, Sarah's experience showed clearly. She understood the tactical principles instinctively and could apply them to complex scenarios. When other students struggled with map reading or battle drill procedures, Sarah became an unofficial tutor during their limited free time. The instructors noticed her leadership even when she wasn't in an official leadership position. Her first leadership evaluation in the benning phase was textbook perfect. Sarah planned and executed a night ambush with precision and creativity. She positioned her soldiers effectively, maintained communication discipline, and adapted quickly when the enemy changed their approach. The Ranger instructor had no choice but to give her a passing grade. But Sarah's real test came during her second leadership position. She was tasked with leading a daytime reconnaissance mission to gather intelligence on enemy positions. The scenario was designed to test her ability to balance mission requirements with soldier welfare. Exactly the kind of situation that had caused her second failure. Halfway through the mission, one of her soldiers developed severe heat exhaustion. The temperature had soared unexpectedly, and Private Martinez, no relation to Sarah, was showing signs of heat stroke. His core temperature was dangerously high and he was becoming disoriented and confused. Sarah's mind raced through her options. She could evacuate Martinez and abort the mission, just like she had done in the mountains, or she could push forward with the mission and risk a soldier's health. But this time, Sarah had prepared for exactly this scenario. She quickly reorganized her squad, sending 2 soldiers to establish an overwatch position, while she and another soldier provided immediate treatment for Martinez. She moved the team to a shaded position, initiated cooling procedures, and called for medical support. But instead of waiting for evacuation, she used the delay to conduct surveillance of her original objective from their new position. When the medics arrived, Sarah had already gathered the required intelligence and successfully completed her mission, while ensuring her soldier received proper medical care. She had found the creative third option that balanced mission success with soldier welfare. The Ranger instructor watched her performance with obvious approval. The mountain phase began in November, and Sarah felt confident as her squad moved into the Georgia wilderness. She knew these mountains intimately now, having trained on them twice before. Every trail, every steep climb, every potential hazard was familiar to her. But familiarity also bred a dangerous sense of comfort that she had to constantly fight against. Sarah's mountain leadership positions went smoothly. She navigated perfectly, communicated effectively, and adapted to changing situations with the experience of someone who had been tested before. Her squad trusted her completely, knowing that she had their backs while also accomplishing the mission. The other students began looking to her for guidance even when she wasn't officially in charge. During a particularly challenging night movement, Sarah noticed that the newest student in their class was struggling badly. Private Thompson was on his first attempt at Ranger School and was having difficulty keeping up with the pace. He was falling behind during marches and making mistakes during training exercises. Sarah could see the signs. Thompson was about to quit. Instead of ignoring the situation, Sarah took Thompson under her wing. During their brief rest periods, she shared techniques for managing fatigue and stress. She helped him adjust his equipment load and taught him how to pace himself during long movements. Most importantly, she convinced him that struggling didn't mean failing. It meant learning. Thompson's improvement was dramatic. With Sarah's mentoring, he began performing at the standard expected of Ranger students. Other instructors noticed the transformation and began watching Sarah's leadership style more closely. They saw someone who could develop other soldiers while maintaining high standards, exactly the kind of leader the Ranger Regiment needed. As the mountain phase neared its end, Sarah felt a cautious optimism that she had never experienced before. She was performing better than ever. Her leadership was clearly recognized by both instructors and students, and she had found ways to succeed without compromising her values. But she also knew that Ranger School saved its hardest challenges for last. The swamp phase in Florida would test everything she had learned over the past months. The environment was harsh, the missions were complex, and the sleep deprivation reached its peak. Students who had survived the first two phases sometimes broke down completely in the swamps. Sarah had never made it this far before, so she would be entering completely unknown territory. But for the first time in her 3 attempts, Sarah felt truly ready for whatever Ranger School could throw at her. She had learned from her failures, developed new skills, and proven that she could lead effectively under pressure. Her confidence wasn't based on arrogance or wishful thinking. It was built on a foundation of hard-earned experience and demonstrated competence. As her squad prepared to move to Florida for the final phase, Sarah reflected on how much she had changed since her first attempt. She was no longer the eager young soldier trying to prove she belonged. She was a seasoned leader who had earned her place through perseverance and growth. The woman who had failed twice was gone, replaced by someone stronger and more capable than she had ever imagined possible. The Florida Everglades in December were unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The swamp wasn't just hot and humid. It was a living entity that seemed determined to break every student who entered it. Knee-deep water mixed with mud that could suck the boots right off your feet. Alligators watched from fallen logs with ancient, patient eyes. Mosquitoes and other insects formed clouds so thick they could choke an unwary soldier. Sarah's squad had been in the swamp for 5 days when everything changed. They were conducting their final major training exercise, a complex mission that would determine who graduated and who went home. The scenario involved infiltrating enemy territory, gathering intelligence, and conducting a series of coordinated attacks over 3 days and 2 nights. The weather had been deteriorating steadily. What started as typical Florida humidity had developed into a dangerous tropical storm system. Wind speeds were increasing hourly, and the rain had gone from intermittent showers to a steady downpour that reduced visibility to less than 50 feet. The instructors had considered postponing the exercise, but the forecast showed conditions would only get worse over the next week. Sarah was serving as squad leader for this final evaluation. Her team included 12 students from her original class, all of whom had made it through the previous phases together. They had become a tight unit, trusting each other completely and working together like a well-oiled machine. Thompson, the soldier Sarah had mentored in the mountains, was now one of the most reliable members of the team. The mission began before dawn on a Tuesday. Sarah's squad was tasked with moving 15 miles through the swamp to establish an observation post overlooking a simulated enemy compound. From there, they would conduct surveillance for 24 hours before launching a coordinated attack with 2 other squads. The plan was complex and demanding, requiring precise timing and flawless execution. 3 Ranger instructors were accompanying Sarah's squad to evaluate their performance. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was a veteran of 3 combat deployments who had earned his Ranger tab the hard way. Sergeant First Class Williams was newer to the instructor team, but was known for his attention to detail and fair evaluations. Captain Brooks was the senior instructor, a West Point graduate who had commanded a Ranger company in Afghanistan. The movement through the swamp was more difficult than anticipated. The storm had raised water levels significantly, forcing the squad to wade through chest-deep water in some areas. Their equipment was getting soaked despite waterproof protection, and the heavy rain made map reading nearly impossible. Sarah had to navigate primarily by compass, using her hard-earned skills from previous failures. By midday, the weather had become genuinely dangerous. Wind gusts were approaching 60 miles per hour, and trees were beginning to fall around them. Captain Brooks made the decision to alter the mission, moving the squad to higher ground to wait out the worst of the storm. They found a small island with enough elevation to provide some protection from the rising water. The squad established a temporary patrol base and settled in to wait. The instructors huddled together to discuss whether to abort the exercise entirely. The storm was intensifying beyond anything they had trained for, and student safety was becoming a real concern. But they were so close to the end of the course that canceling the final exercise would mean recycling the entire class. That's when disaster struck. A massive pine tree, weakened by the saturated ground and buffeted by hurricane-force winds, began to fall directly toward their position. Sarah saw it first and shouted a warning, but there wasn't time for everyone to get clear. The tree crashed down with tremendous force, its massive trunk landing squarely on the instructor's position. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was completely pinned under the tree trunk, unconscious and bleeding from a head wound. Sergeant First Class Williams had managed to partially dodge but was trapped by heavy branches that had broken his leg badly. Captain Brooks had escaped the main impact but was disoriented and showing signs of a concussion. The squad members who weren't trapped immediately began trying to lift the tree, but it was impossibly heavy. The trunk was at least 3 feet in diameter and waterlogged from the storm. Even with all 12 students working together, they couldn't budge it more than a few inches. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez remained unconscious underneath, and his breathing was becoming labored. Sarah's mind raced through their options. They were 15 miles from the nearest road, in the middle of a tropical storm with no way to call for immediate help. Their radios weren't powerful enough to reach base camp through the storm interference. The instructors who were supposed to be evaluating them were now depending on them for survival. She quickly assessed the situation and began issuing orders. Thompson, Johnson, start cutting branches off this tree to reduce the weight. Martinez, Chen, check our medical supplies and start treating Williams's leg. Patterson, Lewis, try to raise someone on the radio from higher ground. The students responded immediately to Sarah's commands. Even though she wasn't officially in charge of the entire mission, everyone recognized that she had the most experience and the clearest head in the crisis. They worked with desperate efficiency, cutting branches with their survival knives and trying to create leverage points to lift the massive trunk. Sergeant First Class Williams, despite his broken leg, tried to maintain command authority. Martinez, he called out to Sarah through gritted teeth. This isn't your mission anymore. We need to focus on getting help. But Sarah knew they couldn't wait for outside assistance. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's breathing was getting worse and his pulse was weakening. If they didn't get him out from under that tree soon, he was going to die. The storm was too intense for helicopter evacuation, and ground vehicles couldn't reach their location. Sir, with respect, we don't have time to wait for help, Sarah replied firmly. We have to get Rodriguez out now or we're going to lose him. She turned back to her squad and began organizing a more systematic approach. Using their knowledge of physics and leverage, she directed them to find long branches that could serve as prying tools. She positioned students at strategic points around the tree and coordinated their efforts to lift it in unison. The first attempt failed. The tree was simply too heavy and their makeshift levers weren't strong enough. Sarah could see panic starting to creep into some of her soldiers' faces. They were young men who had never faced a real life-or-death situation, and the weight of responsibility was overwhelming them. Listen to me, Sarah called out over the howling wind. We've trained for this. Maybe not exactly this situation, but we've learned how to solve problems under pressure. Rodriguez is counting on us and we're not going to let him down. We're Rangers and Rangers don't quit. Her words had an immediate effect. The students' posture straightened, and their movements became more focused and determined. They weren't just students anymore. They were soldiers with a mission to save their instructor's life. Sarah had transformed a panicked group into a cohesive team, with a few well-chosen words. But words alone wouldn't move the tree. Sarah knew they needed a different approach, something that would give them the mechanical advantage they needed to lift the massive trunk. As she looked around their limited resources, trying to find a solution that could save Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's life, she realized that this moment would define not just her Ranger School experience, but her entire military career. Sarah stared at the massive tree trunk pinning Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and forced herself to think clearly despite the chaos around her. The storm was getting worse. Rodriguez's breathing was becoming more labored, and time was running out. She needed a solution that would give her squad the mechanical advantage to move a tree that weighed several tons. Then she remembered something from her engineering classes at the University of Texas. If they couldn't lift the tree directly, maybe they could roll it. The trunk was round, and if they could create a fulcrum point and coordinate their efforts properly, they might be able to rotate it enough to free Rodriguez. Johnson, Thompson, help me dig out this side of the tree, Sarah shouted over the wind. We're going to try to roll it instead of lifting it. Chen, find me the strongest branch you can, something at least 6 feet long that won't break under pressure. The students immediately understood her plan and began working with renewed purpose. They used their hands and survival knives to dig away the mud and debris on one side of the tree trunk, creating a depression that would allow it to roll. Meanwhile, Chen and Martinez searched for suitable branches to use as levers. Sergeant first. Class Williams, still trapped but conscious, tried to maintain his authority. Martinez, you're exceeding your authority. This should be a command decision. Sarah looked at Williams with respect but determination. Sir, Rodriguez is dying. We can discuss command structure after we save his life. She turned back to her soldiers. Patterson, Lewis, any luck with the radio? Negative, Patterson called back. The storm is blocking everything. We're completely cut off. Sarah nodded grimly. They were truly on their own, 15 miles from help, with an unconscious instructor who needed immediate medical attention. The weight of responsibility could have been crushing, but instead Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her. This was exactly the kind of situation she had trained for, even if she never imagined it would involve saving her instructors' lives. Okay, here's what we're going to do, Sarah announced, gathering her squad around her. We're going to set up a coordinated roll. Thompson, Johnson, Martinez, you three get on the far side and push when I give the signal. Chen, Patterson, Lewis, you're with me on this side with the levers. Williams, can you pull Rodriguez clear once we get the tree moving? Williams nodded, his face pale with pain but determined. Despite his broken leg, he positioned himself to grab Rodriguez as soon as there was clearance. Sarah checked on Rodriguez one more time. His pulse was weak but steady and he was still breathing. She could see blood pooling under his head and she knew they had to move fast. Everyone ready? We get one chance at this. If we mess up, we could make things worse. The students took their positions around the massive tree trunk. The storm continued to rage around them, with rain driving sideways and wind that made communication difficult. But they all focused on Sarah's voice, waiting for her command. On my count, Sarah called out. 1, 2, 3, push. 12 people strained against the tree with everything they had. For a moment, nothing happened. The trunk was simply too heavy, too embedded in the soft ground. Sarah could hear her soldiers grunting with effort, but the tree didn't budge. Again, Sarah shouted. Don't give up. 1, 2, 3, push. This time, something gave. The tree shifted slightly, maybe only an inch, but it was movement. Sarah felt a surge of hope and pressed her advantage. It's working. Keep going. One more time. Everything you've got. 1, 2, 3, push. The tree rolled. Not much, but enough to create a gap between the trunk and Rodriguez's chest. Williams immediately lunged forward, grabbed the unconscious instructor under his arms, and pulled him clear just as the tree settled back into place. Rodriguez was free, but he was in bad shape. His breathing was shallow. He had a severe head wound, and his left arm was clearly broken. Sarah immediately began first aid while directing other students to create a shelter from the storm. Chen, get me the medical kit, Sarah ordered. Thompson, you and Johnson start building a lean-to. We need to get Rodriguez out of this rain. Patterson, keep trying the radio. Martinez, help Williams with his leg. Working with practiced efficiency, the students transformed from a rescue team into a medical team. Sarah used her combat medic training to assess Rodriguez's injuries while the others created a makeshift field hospital under their improvised shelter. The head wound was the most serious concern. Rodriguez had a significant laceration on his scalp and showed signs of a severe concussion. Sarah knew they needed to keep him warm, monitor his breathing, and prevent him from going into shock. Using supplies from their survival kits, she bandaged his head wound and immobilized his broken arm. How is he? Williams asked through gritted teeth as Martinez splinted his broken leg. Stable for now, Sarah replied, but he needs real medical attention soon. We have to get him out of here. That's when Sarah made the decision that would define her as a leader. Looking at the storm around them and the injured instructors depending on her, she realized they couldn't wait for rescue. They had to create their own solution. Listen up, she told her squad. We're going to carry Rodriguez and Williams out of here. It's 15 miles to the nearest road, but we can't wait for the storm to pass. Rodriguez needs a hospital, and Williams needs his leg set properly. The students looked at each other uncertainly. 15 miles through swamp and storm carrying 2 injured men was an enormous challenge. But they had just moved a tree that should have been impossible to move. They were starting to believe that Sarah could lead them through anything. Patterson Johnson, you're our strongest. You'll take point with Rodriguez on a litter. Thompson Chen, you'll spell them every hour. Martinez Lewis, you help Williams walk. I'll navigate and coordinate. Using their ponchos and branches, they constructed a makeshift stretcher for Rodriguez. Captain Brooks, who was recovering from his concussion, insisted he could walk on his own despite Sarah's concerns. The group organized themselves into a rescue convoy and prepared to move out into the storm. As they prepared to leave their temporary shelter, Rodriguez briefly regained consciousness. His eyes found Sarah's face and he managed a weak smile. "Good job, soldier," he whispered before slipping back into unconsciousness. Those 3 words meant more to Sarah than any evaluation or grade she had ever received. This was real leadership. Not the artificial scenarios of training, but actual life-and-death responsibility. She had risen to the challenge and proven that her previous failures had been preparation for this moment. The march through the storm would be the hardest thing any of them had ever done. But Sarah knew they would make it. She had finally found what she had been searching for through 3 attempts at Ranger School. Not just the ability to complete difficult training, but the capacity to lead others through impossible situations. The woman who had failed twice was about to succeed in the most important mission of her life. The 15-mile march through the storm became a testament to human endurance and teamwork. Sarah led her squad through chest-deep water, around fallen trees and across terrain that would have been challenging in perfect weather. Carrying Rodriguez on the improvised stretcher while supporting Williams with his broken leg turned the journey into an epic test of determination. Every hour, Sarah rotated the litter bearers to prevent exhaustion. She navigated by compass alone, since the storm made map reading impossible and GPS devices weren't part of their authorized equipment. Her previous failures at Ranger School had taught her to read terrain features even in the worst conditions. Skills that now meant the difference between life and death. Thompson, the soldier Sarah had mentored in the mountains, proved invaluable during the march. He anticipated her commands and helped coordinate the squad's movements without being asked. The other students followed Sarah's leadership naturally, never questioning her authority despite the presence of 3 instructors in their group. After 8 grueling hours, they reached the extraction point, a logging road that emergency vehicles could access. Patterson had finally managed to raise someone on the radio during a brief lull in the storm, and an ambulance was waiting when they emerged from the swamp. Rodriguez was immediately loaded onto a stretcher and rushed toward the nearest trauma center. As the ambulance disappeared into the stormy night, Sarah felt her knees buckle for the first time. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the crisis was fading, and the full weight of what they had accomplished was hitting her. Williams, despite his own injuries, placed a hand on her shoulder. "That was the finest display of leadership I've seen in 15 years of instructing," he said quietly. "You saved Rodriguez's life today, but Sarah's ordeal wasn't over." The commanding officer of Ranger School, Colonel Peterson, arrived at the medical facility 3 hours later to debrief the incident. He needed to understand exactly what had happened and determine whether the students had acted appropriately during the emergency. Sarah found herself standing at attention in a hospital conference room, still wearing her muddy, torn uniform from the swamp. Colonel Peterson was the intimidating figure, a combat veteran with multiple deployments and a reputation for demanding perfection from his students and instructors alike. "Martinez," he began, "you took command of a situation involving 3 instructors without being officially appointed as leader. Explain your actions." Sarah straightened her shoulders and looked the colonel directly in the eyes. "Sir, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was dying. Someone had to take charge and organize the rescue effort. I was the most experienced student present and the only one who had been through the previous phases of training multiple times. And you decided to move 2 seriously injured men 15 miles through a tropical storm instead of waiting for professional rescue personnel?" "Yes, sir. Rodriguez needed immediate medical attention that we couldn't provide in the field. The storm was too severe for helicopter evacuation, and ground vehicles couldn't reach our position. The only option was to bring the injured to medical care." Colonel Peterson studied her for a long moment. Sarah couldn't read his expression, and she wondered if her 3rd attempt at Ranger School was about to end with disciplinary action instead of graduation. Rodriguez underwent emergency surgery when he arrived at the hospital. The colonel said finally. The doctors said another hour of delay could have been fatal. His skull was fractured, and he had internal bleeding that required immediate intervention. Sarah felt relief wash over her, but she maintained her military bearing. How is he doing, sir? He'll make a full recovery. Williams's leg was successfully set, and Captain Brooks is being treated for a mild concussion. All 3 instructors are expected to return to duty within a few months. The colonel paused and walked to the window, looking out at the storm that was finally beginning to weaken. Martinez, in my 25 years in the Army, I've seen a lot of soldiers face emergency situations. Most freeze up or panic when confronted with real life or death responsibility. You organized a complex rescue operation, saved lives, and demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership we're trying to develop in Ranger School. Sarah wasn't sure how to respond, so she remained silent. Colonel Peterson turned back to face her. Your first 2 attempts at this course ended in failure because you were learning how to balance mission requirements with soldier welfare. Today you proved that you've mastered that balance. You completed an impossible mission while ensuring that every person under your command survived and succeeded. The colonel walked over to his briefcase and pulled out a folder. The board of instructors met this evening to discuss your performance throughout this 3rd attempt. Even before today's incident, you were exceeding the standards in every evaluation category. Your leadership during the emergency simply confirmed what we already knew. He handed Sarah an official document with the Ranger School letterhead. Congratulations, Ranger Martinez. You've successfully completed the Ranger course. Sarah stared at the graduation certificate, hardly believing what she was seeing. After 3 attempts, 2 failures, and more challenges than she had ever imagined, she had finally achieved her childhood dream. But more importantly, she had proven to herself that she could lead effectively when it truly mattered. The graduation ceremony 3 days later was small and private, held in a hospital conference room instead of the usual parade ground. Rodriguez attended from his wheelchair, still bandaged but alert and smiling. Williams came on crutches, and Captain Brooks wore a patch over his injured eye. All 3 instructors insisted on being present to see Sarah receive her Ranger tab. As Colonel Peterson pinned the black and gold Ranger tab on Sarah's uniform, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The first failure had taught her humility. The second failure had taught her that good intentions weren't enough without good judgment. The 3rd attempt had taught her that real leadership meant taking responsibility when others couldn't or wouldn't. You know, Rodriguez said after the ceremony, I've been an instructor here for 8 years. I've seen thousands of students come through this course. Most of them are trying to prove they're tough enough to be Rangers. You're the first student I've met who proved she was tough enough to save Rangers. Sarah's father flew in from Texas to attend the ceremony. As they stood together outside the hospital, he looked at the Ranger tab on her uniform with obvious pride. I always knew you'd get there eventually, he said, but I never imagined it would happen like this. Neither did I, Sarah replied. I thought Ranger School was about proving I could handle anything the Army could throw at me. It turned out to be about proving I could handle anything life could throw at me. 6 months later, Sarah received orders to the 75th Ranger Regiment, where she would serve as a platoon leader in real combat operations. As she prepared for deployment, she often thought about her journey through Ranger School. The failures had been just as important as the final success, because they had taught her lessons she couldn't have learned any other way. Sarah Martinez had failed Ranger School twice, but on her 3rd try, she had done something more significant than just graduate. She had discovered that true leadership wasn't about being perfect or never making mistakes. It was about learning from failure, growing stronger through adversity, and rising to meet challenges when others depended on you. The woman, who had once dreamed of becoming a Ranger while watching documentaries with her father, had become something even better, a leader who could be trusted with the lives of others. Her Ranger tab wasn't just a symbol of her own achievement. It was proof that persistence, courage, and the willingness to learn from failure could overcome any obstacle. In the end, Sarah's story wasn't really about becoming a Ranger. It was about becoming the kind of person who deserved to wear the tab, someone who would never give up on their soldiers no matter what the cost.